Welcome to datascience.show, the podcast where data science meets executive leadership. We talk with top AI and analytics thought leaders about turning data into real business impact. If you're a C-level leader or data expert shaping the future, you're in the right place.
Let me start with a short, real vignette. A global insurer commissioned an internal check on a vendor model that scored applicants for risk. The internal review said, no major concerns. 6 weeks after deployment, a regulatory inquiry and an independent auditor's report revealed an undocumented vendor dependency, data from a third-party enrichment service, with biased sampling and a gap in the provenance trail. Remediation took months, cost a 7-figure sum, and worse, left the board with no clear narrative to present to auditors or insurers. This episode is about preventing that exact scenario, how executives commission independent audits so findings become fundable, actionable assurance rather than technical theater. From models to measurable value. That's the playbook I'm walking you through today.
Quick frame before we dive in. Treat third-party audits as assurance capital, not consultancy theater. That means you ask 3 executive questions up front. What decision will this audit unlock? What budget will I release if it finds X? And what contract levers do I need to demand a fix? If you can't answer those 3, pause the audit. Because audits without decision pathways become expensive reports that sit on shelves.
So what should an independent audit actually cover? Keep it pragmatic. At minimum, scope should include governance and model ownership, who signed off and what risk appetite applied, data provenance and feature label lineage. Do you have an evidence trail from source to prediction? Model behavior across sampled cohorts, stress tests on underrepresented populations and edge cases, performance metrics under operational distribution shifts, security posture including dependency mapping and supply chain disclosures, and procurement and contractual entitlements, what the vendor agreed to provide and what they didn't. Don't let technical teams turn this into an internal runbook. Your audit scope must be readable by an audit committee and by legal counsel, and it must produce evidence, not just opinions.
Choosing and vetting auditors matters as much as scoping. Credibility criteria I use: demonstrable independence, no recent consulting engagement with the vendor. Domain mix. Auditor team should include technical ML auditors, data forensics experts, and legal compliance reviewers. Reproducible methods. Auditors must provide test harnesses, data sampling plans, and threat models, and a conflict of interest clause in their contract. Sample IFP language. Auditor must demonstrate independence, provide reproducible test artifacts, and commit to a non-conflicted evidence access plan. For cadence, think in terms of discovery audits that are short and fast, followed by deeper reviews only if high-severity issues appear. That staged approach keeps cost and vendor friction manageable.
Executives need deliverables they can read in 5 minutes. Ask for a 1-page executive summary with a clear verdict: green, amber, red, mapped to business impact. Require reproducible test harnesses and sampling logs so your teams can validate claims later. Demand severity bands for findings: what's high, medium, low, and an explicit remediation recommendation with estimated effort. The evidence pack should include raw test outputs, provenance snapshots, access logs, and a short board scorecard template that ties each finding to an observable KPI and a remediation deadline. That way you get both granularity for technical teams and a concise narrative for audit committees.
Now, let's talk money and contracts. This is where assurance becomes executable. Procurement clauses you should insist on. Audit rights that include limited scope evidence access. Remediation SLAs tied to severity bands. Escrow triggers or defined termination rights for critical supply chain failures. And a scope change control to prevent vendors from quietly shifting components out of scope. Budget expectations. A focused discovery audit for a single critical model is a mid-5-figure to low 6-figure line item, depending on data sensitivity and access complexity. Deeper forensic reviews scale up. Negotiation levers include phased payments tied to deliverables, vendor co-funding where the risk is operational, and indemnities for supply chain misrepresentations.
Turning findings into funded remediation is the part I see most teams stumble on. Use a triage rubric. Monitor, patch, reprocure, insure. For each finding, assign a lane with a single executive owner, a budget ask, and an estimated timeline. High-severity technical gaps that affect legal exposure or customer outcomes go to reprocure or patch with emergency funding authority. Less urgent issues go to monitoring or a scheduled patch window. Insurers and auditors want to see you committed to remediation, so require the audit to include a remediation runway and cost estimates. Have procurement pre-authorize an emergency remediation budget so you can act fast without reopening long approvals.
Here's a compact 30-90-day pilot blueprint you can follow right away. Day 0 to 10, pick one high-impact model, customer-facing, or one with regulatory exposure, and define a tight scope that includes governance, provenance, and model behavior. Day 10 to 30, run an RFP with 2 independent auditors, lock in evidence access clauses and deliverables. Day 30 to 60, run the discovery audit, expect a short turn of findings and a rehearsal of the remediation playbook. Day 60 to 90, finalize remediation priorities, secure funding for high-severity lanes, and prepare a board brief. The pilot is designed to prove the assurance workflow. Vendor pushback will be lower when the scope is tight, and you can show this is a one-off proof of value before any broader program. Boards and audit committees want KPIs, not anecdotes. Useful metrics to demand? An audit readiness score that aggregates governance, provenance, and behavior testing. Severity distribution across findings. Remediation velocity. Percent of high-severity findings closed within SLA. Residual exposure, expressed as estimated financial or compliance impact. And evidence completeness, the percent of required artifacts the vendor provided without restriction. Present these with a one-line recommendation. Green means monitor, amber means fund remediation, red means escalate to procurement and legal. Simple, objective, and linked to dollars or regulatory risk. Those are the levers executives care about.
A few practical do's and don'ts before we close. Do: require reproducible artifacts and an executive-ready scorecard. Do: budget a small pilot to prove the process. Do: insert audit rights and remediation SLAs into new vendor contracts. Don't: accept audits that deliver only narrative assessments without evidence. Don't let audits be a one-time checkbox. And don't, this matters, skip the contract levers. Without them, vendors can withhold critical evidence under the guise of IP or security concerns.
Key takeaways. 1. Scope audits for decisions. Make the question you need answered explicit. 2. Require deliverables that translate into funded remediation. Executive summaries, severity bands, test harnesses, and a remediation runway. 3. Insert procurement clauses that give you audit access and remediation levers. If you walk away with one immediate action, pick one critical model, budget a 30-90-day discovery audit, and prepare a board brief that ties potential findings to a decision and a dollar amount. That turns uncertain technical risk into assurance capital you can act on.
If this episode helped you frame an actionable pilot, subscribe to datascience.show. We bring you executive playbooks that move from models to measurable value. Next week, we'll dive into scorecards you can put in a board pack, practical templates, and language you can copy into procurement. Thanks for listening. Remember, clarity over complexity and strategy before technology. That's the difference between models and value.
Thanks for listening to datascience.show. If you found value in this episode, subscribe, share it with your network, and join us next time as we explore how data science drives smarter decisions and better business outcomes.